We have two great speakers tonight on the topic of gamification. We have Robert Neal, which is a fantastic last name. He's an experienced strategist. He's going to talk about, well, first of all, he owns Qualia. It's a digital experience company based in Tempe. And he's going to talk about the psychology and cognitive science behind gamification, or at least some of it. And we also have Ben Reichert, who is the co-founder of a gamification company, and you can talk about that later, and also the co-founder of Game Collab, which is a co-location facility down in Central Phoenix on the corner of Thomas and Central. And I believe you're transitioning into more of an incubator style, providing other services to game designers and developers as well.
Right. I'm Robert Neal. I'll give you a little background about me. So I actually used to work at TerraLever a long time ago. That's where I sort of started doing user experience design. Before that, I was a developer, developed websites and things like that. Then I went to a video game company called Argix Entertainment, kind of a small company. They have 175 million registered users, but not a household name. But I worked on gamifying their websites there, so they had about 7 properties. They have maybe a dozen video games, different properties. I worked on gamifying those properties so that people would be more active on them, visit more often, play games more often, things like that. And then I came back to Arizona and been working at Qualia as a experienced strategist. So today I'm going to talk about gamification. Hope that's not a surprise to anybody. So this is going to be sort of an introductory talk. Obviously it's only about 20 to 30 minutes, so we're not going to get too deep into it. And for each of the concepts that I go over in game elements, there's going to be layers of complexity, and I'm going to be glossing those. So I'm not giving you the totality of gamification. It's a complicated subject, but hopefully enough to sort of whet your appetites. So level 1. So what's gamification, right? I think the best description of gamification is using game elements in non-game context. So gamification isn't making video games. They're pretty distinct. And one way to sort of understand that distinction is what the goal of gamification is versus the goal of making video games. So non-game contexts are contexts where you have a goal that's not entertainment, right? So typically with video games, your primary goal is entertainment. With gamification, your goal is typically something else. So maybe it's increasing sales, driving traffic somewhere to a website, getting people to do something that they wouldn't normally do. So any sort of context where goal isn't the primary, or entertainment isn't the primary goal. So it might be a secondary goal or a tertiary goal, but definitely not primary, right? And then game elements, what are these? Well, they're these very complicated things that only game designers can do. So not really, right? Otherwise I wouldn't be able to. That'd be the end of my presentation. So if any of you are familiar with interaction design, then you probably use interaction patterns. You probably have an interaction pattern library. And really a good way of thinking of it from an interaction design perspective is game elements are just interaction patterns. They're just another tool in your toolbox. Just like you use login interaction patterns or some sort of e-commerce interaction patterns. Game elements can be used that way, in the simplest form. The 3 most common elements for gamification are points, badges, and leaderboards. So points, so one scenario where we might use points is, let's say you have a sales team and you want them to be competitive, so you might give them a point for every $1 in revenue that they sell. And if they hit a minimum threshold, maybe you'll give them a bonus that month. And then whoever has the most points at the end of the year, maybe you'll give them like a trip to Hawaii, right? So that's a way of gamifying the sales team. Badges, probably we're all familiar with badges. If you ever got online, you've probably gotten a badge for something, whether it's a good use of it or not. They're typically reserved for things like concrete goals. So you might get a badge for signing up for something, right? Like congratulations, you signed up, some weak badge like that. And then leaderboards. So leaderboards are, for any of you that were alive in the 80s and 90s and went into an arcade and you had the high scores, so that's a leaderboard, right? It's top 10 winners. Leaderboards can be a double-edged sword. So they can be demotivating to people if the scores are too high, say. So a lot of times what we do with leaderboards is we'll reduce the population to a local population instead of a global population. So think about like if you're participating in a fitness program online and you see that somebody's run 10,000 miles last year and you ran 1 mile, well, that might be demotivating to you. So if you localize that population to just your friends, then leaderboards are more effective. There's less likely to be large distributions between highs and the high score and your own scores. Right? So first, I want to congratulate everybody for getting this level 2. It's awesome. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. So speaking of levels, one of the approaches to gamification is just sort of game thinking, right? Thinking like a game designer as much as possible. I mean, a lot of us who are implementing gamification aren't game designers, so we don't have the rich background that game designers have. But we sort of learn things about game design and try to apply them. Levels is one of them. If any of you have heard of this psychological concept of flow, here's the idea of levels, right? So you start out with a level that takes a moderate skill level for your target audience and is moderately challenging for your target audience, so you want to avoid boredom and anxiety. As you progress through levels, your skill level increases, just like in games. So you want to make sure that for each level that you have, that you increase the challenge to accommodate that new skill level, right? So each level is progressively more difficult. If you have all the levels the same, then you're going to get boredom, and if you make them too challenging, then you're going to get anxiety. A great example of that is Nike Plus Running. Nike Plus Running app, I think, has the best implementation of gamification ever. And one of the things they do with levels of running is you get your first, it's actually a badge, so you reach that first level at 50K, and then it gets progressively more difficult. So you don't get it every 50K, you have to go another 200K, then another 750, and it gets progressively more difficult to be sort of at a higher level in the Nike Plus environment, right? All right, so go back a little bit. So why use gamification? At Qualia, our two focuses are changing behavior and designing experiences. I think those are actually the two most apt uses of gamification. That's not to say that every instance where you want to change behavior or you want to design experiences, you should use gamification. It's definitely not true. But these are two of the most appropriate, I think, uses of gamification. So changing behavior, some of the things that we use is gamification for changing behavior is improving people's academic behaviors, encouraging people to vote, causing them to vote, and then changing purchase behaviors for things like e-commerce or sales funnels. And then experience design. So experience design is just this. What should the experience be like when someone does something? What should it be like to FI, right? Where FI is some action. So one example is like, what should it be like when someone purchases our product? What should that experience be? What should their mental states be like? And when you're applying gamification, you want to ask, well, is gamification going to improve that experience, or is it not going to improve that experience? If the answer is no, of course you don't want to do it. And if the answer is yes, it's still not clear that you want to do it. So when to use gamification is a little bit more difficult. Really what you need to do is sort of understand gamification, get used to it, play with it a little bit. And then maybe like intuit whether or not it's a good idea to use it. There's no hard and fast rules. And then once you decide that it's a good idea to use it, work out the details, and after you work out the details, see if it's still a good idea to use it, right? So you don't want to force gamification. You don't want it to get in the way of your experience or get in the way of changing behaviors. So really attend to whether or not it works. And we'll talk a little bit about how to do that in a second. So level 3. So I want to talk about low-hanging fruit. Because this is more introductory, I'm going to talk about sort of the easiest way to identify where you might use gamification. And I'm going to use an example that we actually did last year. So we're going to talk about a voter. So this is our patriot. His name's David. He votes. He's one of the 55% of the eligible voters who votes. So he's going to his polling place, right, to vote. You can already start asking questions about his motivations, why he wants to vote, what's in it for him, things like that. But it's a little bit more advanced, so we're going to skip to something a little bit easier. And we're going to talk about him casting his ballot, right? So he's in there, he casts his ballot, he votes for somebody. And you want to pay attention to the overall experience. So you don't want to just hone in on one aspect of an experience and look at it in isolation. You want to look at the total experience. So you might think, well, how is voting? Is it a complicated process? It turns out voting is not a complicated process. People use 2 criteria to make decisions about voting. One is name recognition and one is likability. Very few people go to the third criterion, which is more fact-based and issue-based. So most people, it's just name recognition, likability. It's really a simple process. So injecting gamification here isn't going to be a big deal, right? Oh, did I disappoint people? Obviously, great. Cool. So now he cast his ballot and he's ready to go home, right? So, oh shit, bonus stuff unlocked. Great job, everybody. All right, so there's actually a game element that's part of voting that's been there for the past couple of decades. Anybody say what that is? Anybody guess what gamification element? You've all
voted
experienced
today.
it. What's that?
I voted today, sticker.
That's very good. So you get
The badge.
I know I brought something to give out.
I need that badge. I need more stickers.
So this is your badge. You can put it on your shirt. Cool. So I was hoping a couple people got it wrong, but that's okay. So I voted today sticker. Yeah. So this is a badge, right? And we've had this since the 80s. And a lot of people love it, and they get disappointed when they don't get it. Cool. So here's how I imagined this happening. I imagined a couple people getting it wrong, and then I was gonna give them things like more iTunes gift cards, and then somebody was gonna get it right. So I could talk about failure cases. There's a couple different types of failure cases, right? So one type of failure case is you try something and you fail. For example, login failed. And you don't want to reward these sorts of scenarios. I mean, this could actually be bad, right? So if I do this 3 times, then I might get locked out. If this was like a Microsoft product, I'd get locked out after 3 times. So you don't want to reward those sorts of cases. But there are other failure cases where you might want to reward people anyway, even if they get it wrong. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my daughter. So she uses this thing called Khan Academy to practice her math. And she works on really challenging problems sometimes, right? And this is actually her badge board for her math stuff that she does on Khan Academy. And you can see I highlighted this badge that she got, persistence. And you can see the tooltip for persistence is you answer a problem correctly after having some trouble with a few problems and sticking with the skill. So they're actually giving a badge even though you're making mistakes, and they're giving it because they want to encourage that behavior, right? So badges don't have to just be for when you have this ultimate success, but as a way of engaging someone to continue to do something that's going to benefit them, right? Cool. So back to level 3. So he got his I voted today sticker. When you vote, you have the option of either taking the sticker or not taking the sticker. And it's a good place to remind people that when you gamify a system, it's not likely that the gamification is going to be interesting to 100% of your audience. So, for example, one thing you do is when you test your gamification, when you do usability testing, you don't want to test with your entire audience. You want to test with the audience that is actually going to use gamification. And you also want to design it in a way where gamification goes away if the people aren't interested in it, right? So it shouldn't be intrusive. It should be something that's there for people who are interested in the gamified components and goes away from people who aren't. So let's pretend that David takes his I voted today sticker. What's he going to do with it? Stick it on his shirt, go home, sit on the couch. So he's not going to do this, right? Otherwise he wouldn't take the badge. So what we see here with someone who votes is that they typically take that badge because they want to show people that they participated in this act that we all respect, right? It's a civic duty that we have to vote, and we want people to know that we voted. So So he's probably going to go back to the office, hang out with the water cooler. Notice anything different? And we've all had this experience, right? We go back to the office, even if that person is one of those dirty commies, if they have their I voted today sticker, you still respect them, right? They did their civic duty, you saw that they got that badge, and you respect them for that, even if they made wrong choices about who to vote for. So there's two things, right, that we notice. So one of them is that there exists something that's already gamified. So this is like a really low-hanging fruit. There's already a gamification element in voting. And the other thing is that the gamification element matches our user's motivation. So when we're looking at a situation where we want to change behavior, we want to ask whether or not there's something analogous, tightly analogous to gamification, and whether or not that gamification would match our users' motivations. If I take up too much time or something, let me know. So the presentation's not over, just the gaming part. So I'm going to give you some real world examples. Just make sure that I don't have sound on. So we did a Get Out the Vote campaign last year for Congressman Pastor. And in addition to obviously the I voted today sticker, we identified some other places where gamification might get people to get out and vote more. One of the things is simplifying the voting process. So we know that if you break down a task into smaller subtasks, people are more likely to do it. If you provide a way for people to share publicly commitments, they're more likely to follow through with them. And if you make things more social, obviously you get more social reach, right? So what we did is we broke down the voting process into smaller pieces. We let people share those badges. So one thing is find your polling place, right? So if you guys are like me, then you wait till voting day and then you look up your polling place online. But we want people to plan ahead because we know that if you plan ahead, you're more likely to follow through on that commitment. And if you share that with your friends, then your friends are going to see that you're going to do that. You'll be a social influencer. So one of the benefits is instead of me wearing that badge on voting day and coming into the office and you seeing it and being like, shoot, I missed voting, I forgot it was today, you'll see it before voting day and give your social circle more of a chance to react to the fact that you're participating in this. We also did a leaderboard, not really a leaderboard, this is like a leaderboard except it's not competitive. The idea here is just to show sort of where your friends are. We also gave the ability to remind your friends. So a lot of things pertaining to civic duty and matching people's motivations when they're interested in voting. So this was pretty successful. We had, there will be some numbers up here in a minute. Again, like 30% increase in traffic, something like that. 80% more visitors, sorry, 15% more new visitors. 100% more visits from Facebook. I'm not going to read this, I promise. 300% more. Thanks. So more importantly, there was a lot more votes. So we had something like 36,000 more votes over the previous election. I don't know. Of course, we can't track how many of those are attributable to this campaign, but the campaign was greatly successful, I think in large part due to the gamification. The candidate got 13% points higher votes. So it's very successful. Everybody's happy with it. Here's another example. So we just launched this startup last week. The goal here is for high school athletes to play sports in college, right? So a lot of high school athletes have this aspiration to play sports in college. Turns out that getting to play sports in college is really a lot more complicated than you would think. So if you want to play at an NCAA school, you have to jump through all these hoops, follow all these regulations, use this really poorly designed website that they have. So it's really horrible, and a lot of people just wait until the last minute. So of course, part of our process is we do a lot of user interviews. So we interview people, and a lot of them say, oh yeah, well, we'll do that our senior year. But really you have to start planning your freshman year because your grades, your GPA is for your entire high school career. It's very important. There's also a lot of things that you should be doing to prepare. So we leverage badges a lot to help people see that they're making progress toward their goal. We also use a progress bar for that. and then help them see their next milestones broken down into smaller components, and they get badges when they hit those milestones. And then of course this is in the broader picture of actually getting to play sports in college. So we're taking this really large task and we're breaking it into these smaller tasks that you could share with your friends if you want to, but really it's more for you to see your progress and know that you're making progress towards something you've committed to already. It also leverages another psychological principle where if you can see that you've already made progress toward a goal, you're more likely to continue on that goal than if you can't see the progress or if it's not evident. So we try to bring that out toward the user so they can see that. Hopefully you can see the connections and all that. So this is my email address. So if you want to contact me, I like drinking coffee and alcoholic beverages, so if you ever want to pick my brain, that's a good way to induce me to allow you to do that. So if you have any questions afterwards, you can contact me here. If you have any questions now, you can contact me now. You can ask me questions. Any questions?
Have you ever turned away a client because gamification didn't fit, even though they wanted it?
We've never had a client come to us and ask for gamification.
Oh.
So we typically look at any project and see what is the best fit, and we'll pitch gamification if it fits. I should give out these to people who ask questions. I only have 5, so the first 5 people who ask questions.
Really?
I've actually done a fair bit of work in the healthcare space, and compliance and adherence is a huge issue. So could you speak to what you see going on there with gamification?
Sorry, what's a huge issue?
Compliance,
Oh.
sticking to like a drug regimen or doing sort of rehab follow-up, all sorts of issues come up. And I remember being in a pitch where I tried to introduce some elements of gaming to Amgen, because it was a perfect scenario, and it was really amazing. Like, they just didn't resonate with it, and yet it's such a wide open space for gamification, I would seem.
Yeah, so there are a lot of applications. So one of the things about gamification is people hear game and they're like, well, we don't just want to make this fun, we're a business, we want to focus on numbers. So a lot of times when we're pitching, we focus on 2 things. We focus on the psychology aspect of it, how it affects people's behavior and how they're more likely to do things. We bring up case studies a lot as examples for that. And then we talk about, obviously, the business result. I mean, in all of our experiences with gamification, we've had positive results. And there's a lot of case studies out there for different industries on gamification and the results that come out of it. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned rehab. One of the things I was thinking is there was this study done where they had people in rehab that they were trying to get them to do jobs. They're trying to get them to get jobs. And one of the problems they have with people in rehab is that they, they want to get jobs, but they don't follow through. So they had an A/B test with these groups. And one of the groups, they had them commit orally to filling out a resume and getting a job. They had something like a 10 to 15% follow-through rate. And the other group, they had them publicly commit by writing down that they were going to fill out an application and try to get a job, and they had 100% compliance with that. So we use a lot of psychological studies that aren't necessarily gamification themselves, and then we talk about how you can use gamification along with what we know about psychology to make something like that work. So you could imagine a public commitment on maybe a Facebook group would get people to comply more with something that they're supposed to be doing.
That's a great point.
They already do.
Oh, thank you.
3 more questions. You have more questions, so she.
That's my.
I had a question about the types of people who, thank you, the types of people, if you had any experience with the types of people on the receiving end of sharing these badges, like what is the benefit of social sharing, like why do those people, if you use the example of, the voting sticker, why is it so important that, some people take those voting stickers and some people don't? Is it because they had a bad experience at the poll, or are they going into like voting for people who they don't like, so they're not really proud of that. Like, can you kind of?
So there's some. I think there's some game designers in here. They might be able to help me fill in the blanks on this. So there's this game researcher, something Lorenzo, I think, and I think it's a she. She studied games and pulled out these different archetypes for people who play games. And really, a lot of it is sort of personality, right? And it really depends. Obviously, personalities depend on the context that they're working in. But some people are just more motivated by things like badges, and some aren't.
Yeah.
And some are in some contexts, and some aren't in other contexts.
Yeah.
And some people are motivated to do things based on seeing other people's behavior, even though they wouldn't exhibit that behavior. So maybe I see you with the I voted today sticker, and now I'm more likely to vote, but I myself wouldn't have my voted today sticker.
Sure.
So it's really just about segmenting your audience, understanding what their motivations are, and what sort of behaviors they might exhibit based on those motivations. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's kind of something, you know, I think of it as when I was in second grade in elementary school, and we had a sticker chart.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
and you always wanted to have the most stickers because then you got a reward. But in itself, those individual stickers were meaningful as well. So it was kind of, you know, I don't know if it's kind of understanding that level, but I know that not all personality types are going to relate. So how, like in a project or, you know, suggesting to a client, like how would you then make a good evidence case of use of this, you know?
Yeah, so I mean,
Kind of like your question with the healthcare.
yeah, so we just use a lot of psychology studies. We're
Yeah.
big on cog science psychology. And there's a lot of studies that are specific to certain domains. So we try to make it specific to the client's domain if possible. It's not always possible.
Yeah.
And sometimes general studies are more applicable to a certain situation. But domain-specific studies, especially when they relate to motivation, are the best way to get to a client. So a lot of clients are experts in their industry, but they're not aware of a lot of the stuff that sort of relates to their industry that you might be aware of if you're studying game design, or if you're studying development, or if you're studying psychology. So we help them bridge that gap, that knowledge gap between their industry and what we know about their industry.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any tips you would suggest as far as gamification in environments where like what you're presenting is actually mandatory for the employee? Like,
Yeah.
you know, there's federal laws, you know, so it's really dry material. And are there any tips you would suggest as with gamification to make that process and experience less boring?
Yeah. So that's one type of aspect, or one aspect of gamification that we haven't dealt as much with, but it's just making things funner that just aren't fun. So something like government regulations, nobody likes. Making something like that fun is a big industry for gamification. I mean, typically it's just looking at the users and figuring out what's going to make them excited about it. And understanding that you're not going to get 100% adoption with your gamification. If you get 70% adoption, that's great. Really what you want to do is look at your outcome metrics, what success metrics look like for you, and just make sure that they're positive, right? So even if you only got 20% adoption, but your overall success metrics are higher, then that's successful, right? Even if 80% of the people don't even use the gamification elements that you've introduced.
We have time for one more. How many cards?
Just
do you
one
have?
more.
One more question then.
All right, so there's two hands here. You guys want to fight it out, or?
Paper, rock, scissors.
So my question would be, what do you find is the most effective reward? I mean, is it the recognition, people seeing all your stickers, or is it hard cash?
So it depends on what the badge is for. So if the badge is for something that's just intrinsically motivating, then just having people recognize that you accomplished that, like I ran 50,000 miles or something, right? A lot of people are just happy to show off that they actually did that. Whereas some instances, it's more about, like she was talking about, you're trying to motivate someone to do something. So it's really more about giving them that, putting that reward system in place that gives them better reward system than they would normally get if they didn't have that. So there's different applications of it. One is where there's more intrinsic motivation, and one's where there's more extrinsic motivation. And it depends on the application. I think that all my answers are depends on the application.
Let me give you an example. So I work at a big company. We spend a lot of money on a wellness center, and there's a full workout facility. There's classes. There's all kinds of things, and we're trying to figure out how to get more people to participate. And we're trying to decide, are we going to come up with some really good prizes? Are we going to give them extra PTO days off, or are we going to just flash the picture up on the monitor saying, which everybody can see all the time?
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to decide what's the best way to
Yeah,
reward them.
so we were talking about something similar to that on the way over here. And I mean, one of the things is some goals are going to be more motivating for some people than others. I mean, when it comes to fitness, athleticism differs a lot in a population, right? So one person might be motivated by you challenging them to run a 10K in a month, and one person might be just trying to lose 5 pounds. Like, that would be a huge win for them. And those people oftentimes are going to be less likely to want to show that publicly, but they might want to share it in a group of a similar population as theirs, right? So if the population has these goals that are really small, then you might want to segment those groups out and say, okay, with these people, we're going to have them share internally, but with other people, we might have them share externally about what their goals and successes are. And maybe that the people who have the larger successes are motivators with other populations, but the other populations still have their personal motivations as well. And you can just give money out.
Yeah.
Thanks, Robert, for the good talk. You actually went more in depth into the actual gamification elements than I'm going to do. So what I'm going to talk about is kind of a bit about. First, I'll give you a little background. So first of all, my company is Aviona Games. And you're going to see why I'm not necessarily into the pieces, but I have a master's in international relations. I went to Belgium. I was there for 9 years in political kind of realm doing public relations stuff. I started in democracy and nonprofits, and then went into technology and then transportation. Always kind of, again, just European political level. And 2 years ago, I said, okay, I've had enough. I want to change this up, and I want to get out of politics. I want to do something more creative and fun. And I like playing video games. I started, again, doing public relations, and so I started looking into the power of games and gamification and game design and kind of motivating and changing people's behavior. So I moved back to the States. Moved here, and I started working at ASU, helping set up their Center for Games and Impact. So this is something we got now at the Mary Fulton Teachers College on the Tempe campus, where they're looking at games beyond entertainment, but also at kind of social impact, health, and also education. It was a really eye-opening experience for me. I learned a lot really quickly. Some really great minds behind these kinds of gamifying forces and game design thinking. I left them and I started my own company, Aviona Games, to kind of meld my last package was transportation and mobility with games and gamification and game design, and how can I solve some of these problems that we see in transport and mobility through game design. Since then, and I'll talk about it a little bit later as well, since then in May, as Wayne was saying, I opened up the Game Collab here in Phoenix, where now that was one of the things I really needed. I needed more access to designers, more access to developers, more access to artists. I knew that there was a community here, but they were kind of scattered. So the Collab is there to bring people in physically and have them work in one space on their own projects or together as they want. But what we started to see too is that they needed more than just space. They need assistance, whether it's business development or working with accountants or lawyers or these kinds of things, and also of course financing. So that's why we're looking at now starting going into more of an incubator, accelerator mode, and have that kind of program going on. So that's a bit about my background. Again, I went into this topic kind of full force on my own, trying to figure this out, and essentially try to gamify our mobility habits and transportation habits. So coming for this topic, kind of what is gamification, give an awesome kind of overview of what it is. So again, I'm not going to get too in-depth about it, but very similar to what he said, gamification involves kind of applying game design thinking to non-game design, non-game applications. And so what I've got here is Giant Bomb, which is a really cool site. If you go to it, it's a video game site, of course, but they've gamified the site itself. So it's super fun. If you create a profile and you start digging around, you start seeing there are achievements that you can unlock by, say, what's the name of that plumber back from, Nintendo's early days? And then you like, oh yeah, Mario, and you go to the site and it's just a big wiki, right? So you go to that and you get 2 points and then so on. Badgeville and Bunchball are 2 companies that are kind of doing gamification on a big scale. They're getting a lot of investment. Badgeville has kind of gamified Salesforce. So that right there is one of the earliest kind of, how do I say, one of the easy things to gamify is sales, right? Because sales already is kind of gamified in a lot of senses. Foursquare, then, I think you all know Foursquare, so it's kind of, you're gamifying your interaction, your kind of socialness, where you're being, where you're going, and stuff like that. So I have a little video here, hopefully you'll be able to hear it. It's just a little fun thing that I think, shows you how games are kind of everywhere, or we're always kind of thinking about them. Hopefully it's loud enough. It's not mine, I think it's mine.
My sister and I played almost the exact same game in the car, except she had a long string sliced through all the man-made objects, all the signs, all the buildings, all the cars, but all the trees and hills and all the natural things, they were fine. My game, I envisioned Sam, an imaginary friend. He ran and jumped as fast as the car was going, or faster, and he never touched the ground.
I still do this though.
I think most people play this little semi-conscious fleeting game.
I don't know this one actually, so it's
So take a moment and think about it. What games do you play? Just whatever you do. Do not step in the lava!
right. Hello, come on. Yeah, so that, that kind of, that's what, I guess, what the kind of excitement that I had right away when I started looking at games and thinking, I do this stuff all the time, everybody does this stuff, how can game design not be a powerful kind of tool to use, whether you're trying to get a point across or just trying to engage people. So what isn't gamification? I think often we try to define things by like, what is it, but it helps to kind of say juxtapose it with what isn't the actual thing you're looking at. So what isn't gamification is, first of all, advert gaming. I'll show you a little bit about that. Transmedia and in-game advertising. So again, I just wanted to show you a couple more videos here of these things kind of done well. So here's the best advert game nominees. This is Dutch, so this is really cool.
En nu, Best Advert Game. Hier zijn de genomineerden. Aqua Fresh Ultimate Ontdekkingstocht, Little Chicken Game Company. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Sewer Run, Media Box. Formula face. X for it.
Never played it, but that also looks interesting, right? So there, what we're doing is you have a whole game that's made around this brand, right? So the brand contracts a game design studio developer to make a game specifically for them. So you see a lot of those, even on AAA console games like Spider-Man or Batman and stuff like this. That's all kind of advert games. Then as far as transmedia, now I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I think it's like 4 minutes, but this is the Dark Knight one, which is quite just again used more in kind of marketing
to the Dark Knight,
campaigns.
an alternate reality game attracted more than 10 million unique players to real-time Gotham City. A city where the Joker left his mark on posters and bills and started building an army of henchmen all over the world. At Comic-Con, players gathered to take their first orders from the Joker. Working with players online, they scavenged for clues and found a big one typed out in the sky.
So much of just writing a phone number. So without that phone number, there's this little message.
If you want to be part of my crew, you're going to need to prove you're up to the challenge.
Players hit the streets dressed as their leader. Gotham City began to spill out into the real world, building excitement and anticipation for the Dark Knight. Their efforts put together yet another piece of the puzzle.
Tonight you're gonna break your one rule.
A request to hit local landmarks in full Joker makeup. From London to the Middle East, to Pennsylvania, to India, a worldwide community formed. A chosen community, and a newspaper led them further into the world. A world where nothing was safe from the Joker.
Check out document. No ceases by 1.
Where corrupt cops shamed the city. And where players picked up cakes at bakeries across America with a hidden package inside. A Joker phone to keep in constant contact with the world of Gotham City. A world they could choose to join in any way they wanted. Like a campaign to take back Gotham City.
Hello, I'm Harvey Dent, Assistant District Attorney of Gotham City. I'm calling to ask for your support.
Harvey Dent contacted players by phone and email and asked them to show their support. The response was overwhelming. Pictures streamed in. Dentmobiles brought Harvey Dent's message of change to 33 cities throughout the country. Citizens took to the streets, marched, protested, rallied, screamed, and chanted.
So I'll stop it there, and you can check it out on YouTube if you want. But I mean, these are quite elaborate campaigns. These again are not gamification as such, but this is a way that you can put again a brand mostly across different media platforms. So it can also include games, include comic books. I mean, this again is going to be, you have to look at who your demographic is though, who your type that you're going for. I mean, a lot of this is probably for social people, people who like to explore, I don't know, maybe killers. Depends on what's in the game, the Jokers there, I guess. So that again is not necessarily, not gamification. Although again, what I want to emphasize is a lot of this stuff gets lumped into that terminology. So when someone says, well, you know, gamification is this, and they start kind of thinking about these things. And so this is the last one. This is this in-game advertising, which probably very intuitive way, you know, what it's called. But you see directly in a game, there's like billboards or, you know, however it makes sense, whether it's on a character's T-shirt or something like this. This is actually not happening as much as it used to, where brands are paying to get into these kind of larger games, these AAA games, so like, you know, billboards here in Spider-Man and stuff. I mean, I wouldn't say it's been fully discredited, but at the same time, it doesn't really go along with kind of the game flow. So if you're in the game and, you know, you see it, okay, I guess, but sometimes you could also be taken aback of it. You know, like when you see someone drinking Coke in a movie or something, and like, oh, Coke stuck that in there kind of thing. So you need to be sensitive about that. So those are things that typically aren't gamification, but actually might work in cases where a client, comes in and wants something that's interactive or that has something game related to it. So it's definitely worth considering or thinking about. In fact, why gamify, right? So even gamification stuff, sometimes I have some issues with my designers when they go talk to a client and they say right away, we want to do gamification because everybody's, that's the buzzword. And a lot of them, actually pretty much all of my game designers will say, you don't want gamification, you want a real game, you want a standalone game, you're going to get a lot more interactivity out of it, it's going to be worth a lot more in the long run. But again, Robert showed some great examples where gamification, where kind of like the points, or just a social aspect is useful and can be enough. But what I'd like to talk about now is kind of like 11 reasons why. So you're talking a little bit about the psychology of it. When I was, again, at the center, this was a big point, especially for learning. And then as far as business processes, it's very similar, and customer experience, and of course, ultimately profits, right? So first of all, games are very participatory, right? So there's kind of lean forward, interactive media. So they have decisions, they have consequences, and thus you get agency when you're playing these games. There's a few little tips down at the bottom you can keep in mind if you're trying to design something around using these. They're role playing, so you kind of build this context, right? You have this awareness, and generally you build an empathy towards the character. I don't know if anybody's ever played Touch Mechanic. It's a pretty cool. It's actually not well rated, so I'd try. I think what's it called, Surgeon. Anyways, there's another one. Yeah, Trauma Center. Thank you. Where it's a DS game, and you got your stylus, and you kind of move pieces around. And you actually are a mechanic. It's kind of fun. The Surgeon one I think is a little better because you're sewing up stitches and stuff like this, and realigning bones and things. And Fable, again, there's a lot of these games now where you're either good or you're bad, and your choices in the game, turn you into a certain kind of character. And so again, you're kind of getting this agency. So these are big points of bringing people into why games are so engaging. 3, you got kind of challenges, goals, and rewards. We talked about that earlier as far as points or badges or whatever you want to have. But that does allow for engagement that is sustainable. So you can keep bringing them in by offering them new rewards, new challenges, new achievements, and stuff like that. Dark Souls, I don't know why anybody keeps playing that because it's tough as nails. People do, right? And it's because they get the reward once they finally beat that guy, that boss. Failure is fun, ultimately, if you can put it in context, right? So that's the nice thing about games is that in games you can fail safely. So when you die or when you don't make it, you can try again, no problem. It's not like real life. The consequences aren't as grave, and so you can go through simulation. That's a really great way to get into kind of understand what their behaviors might lead to, or how they could change them, and what their ultimate paths could be. Real-time optimization. So data analysts love this kind of stuff, and so do I when it comes down to it. When you want to track things, right? So you can stick this right in the back end. You can put code in there that allows you to pull out the data, see what your outcomes are, see how your users are interacting with what you're making. You can even change things on the fly. A lot of big companies, Zynga, this is their bread and butter. That's how they get by this, by tracking all these little kind of analytics. Complexity. So in 21st century literacies. So again, 21st century literacies. That's a bit of my education kind of background and what I'm always looking at, especially for learning games. But just in general, the kind of complexity of something like Magic or World of Warcraft or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or any of these things outshines a textbook any day. You've got kids who are middle school or younger playing these card games in their spare time, and they're loving it, they're really involved in it, yet when it comes down to looking at a textbook, it's really boring. It's not nearly as complex as some of the stuff. So the kind of bits and atoms, right? This is where we started to see integrating hardware with software. So you've got these input devices, and again, mobile is a really great way. You start talking about transmedia, you start talking about location awareness and geotagging, alternate reality games. These are all really great ways to get people involved, especially now. And I think too, with kind of 3D printing, that's only going to become more ubiquitous. You start seeing a lot more kind of input devices. And it's really about how you can kind of transfer them across to each different world successfully. I think that'll be interesting. Social aspect, of course, that's one of the main things, especially as far as competition, as far as also giving yourself a benchmark against your peers. And it allows you, it says too, collaborative, intergenerational, right? I mean, we start to see groups forming and collaborative, working together on stuff you never did before. I've got some stuff in here, but you know what I really like, if you ever heard of Folded. So Folded was this game around DNA, and they figured out that, you know, if you crowdsource kind of the DNA, kind of the how do you say? Yeah, thank you. The sequencing, so that you can have people actually do this rather than machines, and it goes a lot faster, right? And they do it because they get rewards and they think it's fun, and they're contributing to science in general, which is really cool. Creativity, right? So we've got new worlds, new genres, new models of gameplay, and this is really where a lot of the indie scene is at right now, which I really love interacting with, as well as, again, I think we're going to see more of that in education and health and games for impact and stuff. We're going to see new things that we just never thought about before, based on game design theory and thinking. Creation. So most games now, one way or another, allow you to create beyond what is given to you. So you're creating worlds, you're creating characters, and those are mostly very successful. I mean, you look at Minecraft. Minecraft is essentially destroying and creating what you want, and even mods. I mean, those have been around forever. So it really empowers people to kind of not only play these games, but make these games, and then really think critically about the game design and the worlds that they're interacting with and why they're doing that. And I think all in all, you start to see a lot of younger kids question and look at these different systems and spaces a lot differently than we have in the past. And finally, the last one is kind of engagement and relevancy, right? So motivation, ambition. I mean, you talked about that before too. When you're motivated, you can really do anything, right? So being engaged makes you feel like there's something going on, and that's really helpful as far as in the classroom, outside the classroom, for learning, for health. Again, you know, if you want people to take medicine or whatever rehab to get them motivated and learning and doing stuff. There's an interesting game too called for cancer patients, where they fly around and they're like shooting cancer for younger kids, and that really makes them, again, part of the agency part, you know, feel that they're overcoming cancer because they're actually really shooting them in this game kind of thing, and so that motivates them to stay with their regimen, to stay positive. I think, you know, positive energy is a good place in healing and health. Anybody have any questions so far? Okay. So what I'm going to get into now is why transportation and mobility. Okay, so I told you a little bit. I was working in transport, and so I started to see all these issues. But generally, you know, transport's an economic driver. It's the backbone of the economy. If we can't get around, we can't do anything. We can't interact with each other. If goods can't get around, we don't get anything in the stores. We don't have anything going on. I mean, ultimately, if you can't transport stuff, you don't really have a society that can function very properly. And we know that there are a lot of issues with it, right? So we know that there's safety issues, you know, efficiency, affordability, comfort, and environmental sustainability. And what was interesting for me when I moved here, I mean, I was looking at all these different complex issues around transport in Europe, and then when I came to Phoenix, I mean, this is a totally different issue, right? But it's very, very interesting to kind of juxtapose those. And I thought, well, all the stuff I was doing around public transport, when I come here, it's a lot harder to kind of advocate a lot of that because it's, isn't it? So what do? Okay, well, there's other things, you know, like parking spaces and urban sprawl and these kind of things. So what I wanted to do was kind of look at how we can try to solve these issues again through game design. And one of them is taking the concept too of what's been happening with transport, this as far as kind of modernization of our transport, our mobility options, let's say. So we've got geolocation, everybody's got one of these one way or another, right? I mean, either you have the standalone or you have it on your phone or something like this. You're able now to kind of get directions where you want to go. This is an example of kind of what they call vehicle-to-vehicle communication or vehicle-to-infrastructure communication. Ultimately, these are all intelligent transport systems and services, ITS. And I was doing a lot of work, again, on public-private partnerships around this and implementing and rolling this out. So I saw that this existed and that there was all these data points and all this information that's starting to be gathered, but nobody was really doing anything with it, except very proprietarily. So how can we take that and make games for kind of mobility, right? So take that information and inform people, motivate them, educate them, and then train them to change their behaviors to the optimal kind of behavior that would be best for everybody, best for mobility, and for themselves. And that's where I started to look a little bit around, you know, I love this picture. This is, 60 people, if you have cars, if you're taking a bus, and if you're taking a bike, right? I mean, look at that, how many cars? Just information like that can be so powerful. And you can gather that times a million now, times a billion, or more with all the data opportunities that we have. So I started to look into how games could actually fit in this space, right? So this is an example now of looking very specific at transport mobility. So you could say health, or you could say education, or whatever. But how would you incorporate games or game-based methods, so gamification being one of them, into this space? So I started looking at what existed. So first of all, we got kind of simulations. And this is agent-based simulations that give you these options, right? So these are two big games. One is Cities in Motion, the other SimCity. It's actually SimCity 4. This was cool because this actually made Gamasutra, which is a blog for game designers and developers. Somebody, when it was still in beta, had it, and they mapped their own town up in the UK. And they mapped it so that they wanted to see where the congestion would be, because he knew where the congestion was because he drove it every day, right? And it was in the exact same spot, right here. You see all the red? So the exact same spot he had the problem in the real world every single day. And that just shows you how robust even a game like that is, and what you can do with simulations like that. I've been talking with people at ASU in their transport department, and they have even more robust simulations. It's just that they look at it from more of a scientific aspect, right? They're trying to map this data, and if you start melding games into it, then it becomes really, really cool, I think. Alternate reality games. This was one in Transport for London that they sponsored called Chroma Roma. So this was based on their Oyster card, so that's taking the public transport, going to the underground, and it had you kind of compete against your friends where you went and which stops you went to. It was a way for them, right or wrong, they wanted people to experience the underground more. So they wanted not just say get more people onto using public transport, but get them to try out new stations that they've never been to. Now, I don't know, that could be a goal that's worthy or not, but this is what they did. It was quite interesting. And then Waze, that's one of my favorite apps. I don't know if any of you have tried this, but it's simply just a GPS application that's got gamification elements to it. So there's social interaction too there as you go around, you drive around. These are little Wazers, so these would be this would be me maybe, and somebody else. And after you level up, you can customize your avatar. So I would see that this person is over here and this person's driving along here, and I can actually text them through this application. I can say how is traffic over there going? Like it looks like it's pretty bad, and it can reply to me. Of course, you want to make sure that they're at standstill, right? Hold on. Oh, wait, what? Reply? And then you can also kind of, indicate what's going on around you, and then say I'll be driving along the highway, and all of a sudden I see there's supposed to be police up ahead, and I look and there's no police. So I say, and it asks me, it says, is this correct or not? And I say, no, I didn't see any police. Yeah, he's still there, kind of thing, right? So that's a really interesting aspect. And then even on the back side of it, they crowdsource the map. So when you're a member of it, when you have a profile of it, you can actually tell them, the direction it told me to go wasn't right. Okay, it gets logged in, and then I did that once, and like the next day I got a message saying, I don't know, Robert 2065 or whatever, updated the maps. So you can go home and you can go online and you can update it. So it's another way of crowdsourcing to the efficiency of these maps.
Can I make a personal plug that everyone get on Waze, because the more people that get on it, the better it is. And
yeah, absolutely.
It's amazing how accurate it is where the police are. cars on the side of the road. If anyone speeds, you're highly motivated to download this thing because people report it.
The other thing is cool is when you drive along, you pick up pieces of candy once in a while. It's not real candy, but you get a little chime. No, I mean, I think it's really cool because, again, it just showed me how powerful gamified map versus, say, just Google Maps or TomToms or whatever. I don't use it anymore. I have Google Maps on there. I have a TomTom. I don't use any of that stuff anymore because this, I get something. I get rewards. You do level up as you go along, and you do see there's a leaderboard based, and it's localized, so it's only really my friends and people I know. So it is pretty cool. Browser games. Now, I'm not 100% happy with the term browser games because there could be many different things, but in general, what you find a lot in browsers is advert games, small flash games that people are just making to have fun. I love traffic. Busmeister, which was actually a game by somebody known in Vienna to kind of promote bus awareness and how that works. So you kind of set up bus stops and stations and make people happy and stuff like that. And then Distraction Dodgers from the University of Minnesota. And that's to kind of show you how you can get distracted as you're driving and how you should pay attention to the road. Otherwise you run over pizza guys and stuff. But I think, again, this was interesting for me because it helps you kind of look at situations, analyze them, master them, and then ultimately learn how to improve your skills. And then public relations games, again, it's kind of advertising, advert games. EcoDrive, this is something by Fiat, so you actually have a USB stick, you stick it in your car. Very proprietary, only Fiat has that, so you actually have to compete against other Fiat drivers. And then eSafety Challenge was as a group, and again in Brussels, who is trying to do awareness around driver safety. I'm not so sure this game really helped in that respect, but it was an interesting little fun gimmicky kind of thing, right? And then the Truck Fuel Eco Driving by Renault Trucks is actually pretty cool, despite it just kind of looks crude. But it's free, it's an iPhone game. Actually, both of these are free, I think free iPhone games. Truck Fuel is also on Android, but it's really about using your fuel economy, or understanding your fuel economy as you're going up and down hills, using cruise control, driving, at certain speeds and braking often and stuff like that. So it is pretty interesting, and if you go through it at least once, it's not a hard game to beat, which is good, so it's accessible, and when you leave, you understand what you did and didn't do wrong, or what you did right and what you did wrong, which I think is great for learning. And then you can do massive multiplayer online games, and this is one called Code of Everend. Again, Transport for London commissioned this, and I don't really know if it's best because when you go to the forums or you see stuff about this, you see it's for kids. It's to teach them to be careful when they cross the road. So I don't know what all this has to do with it, but ultimately these are the roads, okay, and this is where you are, and when you go across these, you enter into some world where there's some kind of a creature you fight. So it's kind of telling you that, these crisscrossy things around you in your real world are a bit dangerous, be careful. So I don't know. Again, when I saw in the forums, a lot of people were saying, this game rocks, and then someone says, yeah, it teaches you this, and they're like, what? I didn't even know it did that. So I don't think it was really effective. And the ultimate kind of aim that I was trying to get at. So again, what I was really looking at is how do we change behavior, right? And how do we optimize these systems of transport? And again, games is really fascinating for me. So I've been doing a lot of this work, talking to like UTI, Universal Technical Institute, about training and getting people excited about being engineers and what that means, as well as talking to the public transport operators. But on my journey, and this is my plug for the game pulled out. So on my journey, I needed these game developers and designers, and I learned so much every day from them, literally every day, that I just want to really showcase what they do. I want them to have a space. I want to raise the industry here in Phoenix. My business partner, Joseph Darnell, and I are really passionate about this. And this is our second kind of like showcasing we're doing. We did a demo night a couple months ago in July, I think. We're there, we had about 13 games on display for people to come and play. This one is this Saturday. I know it's really short notice, but still get there. We've got about 20 games this time on display. You can come and play them. It's actually also the last day of the art of video games exhibit that's going on at the museum right now. So if you haven't seen that, this is a great opportunity. You go, you pay to get in, and you can see everything. So you get access to this, you get access to that, and the rest of the museum as well. And this is something that, you know, a lot of the developers and designers are really good at what they do, and they just often don't want to look up because they just want to keep doing what they're doing. And this is where I think that my role, you know, as more of a kind of not necessarily coding away can help in that regard. So I've been working a lot towards that. So I'd love to have you guys join us this Saturday. And that's that. So there's my email. And yeah, you can pull our website. So anybody have any questions, or I know I'm pretty thorough. That's a lot of stuff to digest. Yeah, go ahead.
One of the, one part of gamification that's always interested me is the idea of agency, because I think the motivation behind a lot of people who play games is the fact that they don't feel like they have a lot of agency in their everyday life, not a lot of control over what's going on. Whereas games put you in a place where you're very much in control because you understand all the interlocking systems that are going on.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, things like Skyrim, right? I mean, it's pretty much essentially you're a superhero kind of guy in this world, and how, you know, this kind of layout, like, how do you want to dominate kind of thing. And that makes people feel good about themselves, or at least allows them to feel a bit more agency than they would in the real world, right?
You ever fought Alduin?
Well, once you do, I guarantee you, you're going to be excited, right? See, so we can take those at those big levels, just small levels. Yeah.
So with the gamification projects that you've worked on, where are companies taking budget from to pay for these projects?
Yeah, so it's tough.
They're not cheap.
No. Well, so as far as budget, that's the thing that varies again depending on what you want to do, right? So some of them are not willing to put in a lot, which is really kind of more required for a more robust platform kind of game or standalone kind of game. So again, something like just a simple gamification of a website or something that can be a bit more manageable. What I'm seeing a lot of them diving into is marketing budget.
Yeah.
And that's again where then it really turns a lot into an advert game or a transmedia type thing. Otherwise, research. So for example, Pearson, we're working with them. This is a game collab related thing that we're doing. So we did a workshop with Pearson, and they brought in like 15 or 16 of their people. And I embedded 6 designers, and they came up with, I think it was 4 prototypes around like a vocabulary kind of game, right? So again, that was more on the research and development side. Yeah, that's kind of mostly where I'm seeing it right now. Anybody else? Anybody interested in doing gamification? Or I mean, yeah. Have you done anything yet, or?
Well, I've just been recently studying it, getting a class on it. I think they're even offering it in degree. Their website called, where you could post all the information that you learn and then just show it to people. It kind of has like a badge system.
So it's gamified itself.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah.
Yeah.
We have gamification for our developers, like there's a point system for what they complete and a leaderboard. But in terms of the software we deliver to our users, we don't have gamification yet. So I'm interested in building in some of these types of concepts.
Very cool. Very cool. I mean, I think a lot of it too has started off internally. I think that's again what you saw with like Badgeville and Lunchballs, that they are offering services where it's more geared at gamifying internal structures of sales teams or developers or whatever it is. And we're starting to see more and more now about customer gamification. Ultimately, they're calling it enterprise gamification, and it is expected to grow a lot according to Gartner and these things. So there is a market there. They say. I'm curious to see how it goes on, but I definitely am an advocate of game design. Anyone else? Cool. Thanks. Appreciate it.